Welcome to Try This at Home. I'm Cliff Bumgardner.
And I'm Harrison Stewart. I forgot to do the pa at the beginning.
We missed a pa.
I missed the pa.
Our myths this week are plywood builder and beat the radar detector. This episode originally aired October 13th, 2004. Directed, as always, by Peter Rees. And Harrison, I think we have an important episode this week.
Oh.
This feels like a big one because it's the build team's first solo myth.
The first solo myth. They don't quite call them Mythbusters yet.
Still just the build team, but it is the beginning of an era. It is the first time that we see someone other than Adam and Jamie fully responsible for a myth. This would obviously go on to become the whole other myth crew, the M7 crew, Cary, Grant, and Tori, that become the other half of the show for most of the show's run. We haven't seen that so far, except now in this episode, we get the first one. That was really, really cool. That was cool to see. Feels like another one of those ching achievement unlocked kind of Mythbusters moments. What'd you think?
I think that it was really funny how through no fault of their own, they absolutely nail it. But the show itself almost frames it like kids make dinner night. You know, where they had to check in with mom and dad to make sure that like everything was cool and copacetic and not, it's like that. No, they're doing great. They've got it.
I was surprised at how it's funny how, when you watch a show like this back, or when you're over the years, whenever I watch Mythbusters, you kind of just take things as they are. And it's funny to see them happen for the first time, because in this episode especially, when they introduce the build team, it's as if the build team has always been there. They're just like, the build team come in to do this, 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 and this, and we all know that. And I'm like, no. That started like four episodes ago.
Yeah.
We've had like 1 month of that in the history of this show, and they're just like, oh well, naturally it's time to give them a
build
myth.
Team.
Yeah, I do wonder. We've talked about before how having the build team and actually giving them myths, as we're seeing now, allowed them to do more. But it is an interesting move to make new characters on the show when you have a successful show, and Adam and Jamie have been the stars and the anchors of the show. It's a pretty big move to say we're going to bring not just one or two, but three new voices into the mix here and give them half the show. I mean, there was a lot of confidence that they had in them to do that.
Yeah.
I would love to know. We need to get somebody in that we can talk to about that aspect of what we're seeing this season of, the half the show is different now in the midst of, a really successful period. That's a heck of a move, and it paid off.
Yeah, big time. Did it also feel a bit to you like they were feeding them lines?
A little bit.
Okay.
Yeah. It felt like they're still, even Adam and Jamie at this point, it's still sometimes, especially in the in-between, those kind of bumper segments back in the blueprint room, it definitely still feels a little forced on that aspect. But yeah.
Which, I mean, is perfectly fair. It was their first, It was their first outing, their first time out of the nest, as it were.
Yes.
So, I mean, they absolutely nailed it. Like, it was a good myth. They even though it was only, technically speaking, two big myths, they jammed a lot into both of them. So
they did.
It definitely, it felt like we were getting plenty of bang for our buck.
Absolutely. And the use throughout this episode of small scale as well is something that I think has been missing from the storytelling until this season, where you sort of get a visual in your head for what is or is not going to happen, because now you've seen it in the small scale. And so it builds anticipation to see the full scale experiment, because you're seeing, especially in the first myth that we'll get to here in a second, the little guy holding on to the plywood thing keep falling and falling. And you're like, when this is Buster, that is going to look absolutely insane. And I can't wait. And it builds anticipation. So not only is it kind of experimentally and scientifically valid, but for the show, it's really, really cool. Myth 1, Plywood Builder. So this is the story of a builder who was blown off the roof of a building while holding onto a sheet of plywood. But he did not fall to his death because he was able to hold onto the plywood and actually fly off the roof and back into the building just a few stories down. Sounds completely plausible, right?
Cliff, I see nothing wrong with this. This is absolutely going to work. If I've learned
physics as we understand it.
Yes. If I've learned anything about aerodynamics over the course of the show, it's that I have nothing to fear. This totally checks out 100%. I think we could just go ahead and call this confirmed.
Yeah. Should we just end the show here? Just end the whole podcast? We're done. We did it.
Bye-bye, but no.
I mean, yeah, this is a ridiculous myth, but at the same time, it's immediately like, oh, I want to see that.
Yeah.
I want to see what's going to happen to Buster.
It was last week you were saying that there's something particularly fun about explosions are one thing. Just gravity. Just seeing something go plop, just is
big boom.
Oh, it's satisfying.
Well, I think one of the reasons for that is it's not something you see very often. We've seen big explosions in movies and stuff for years and years and years. But somebody just falling is really hard to fake.
Yeah.
You kind of just have to do it. And without a crash test dummy like Buster, you're not going to see what we ultimately see in this episode, which is just a full send into the dirt, the way that it happens. And it's, wow, is it something to watch?
That's a really good point, because I feel like you are allowed to laugh at this in a way that you wouldn't be if that were a person, because like if that's a person, they're done. You know, like if it's more than like 3 stories, game over. That's not, you're not walking away from that. So the fact that it's Buster, you could just watch it go plop and go, ah!
That's actually a really good point about kind of some of the thrill of Mythbusters overall, is that they take we've seen a lot of really dangerous, really deadly, and in some cases really dark stuff, and they do give you a way to laugh at it.
Yeah.
That I think is really fun. The way that a horror movie lets you laugh in the face of something terrible, Mythbusters has that too. And if Mythbusters was too serious, it really wouldn't work. Even this myth, some of the stuff that we end up seeing in this myth, if it was too serious, or if they put, I was gonna say if they was too gory, we do actually get some gore in this episode.
A little bit.
Yeah, it's the kind of cathartic nature of the show is really nice and is on display in this episode.
Yeah. It's I mean, and again, like hang gliding fails are something that we would love to be able to laugh at, but the likelihood that someone gets seriously hurt is very high. So like while it is a funny visual, you know that somebody is in serious pain as a result of that. So that takes away from it. Here we get all of the humor of the visual without, having to feel bad about it.
It's like America's Funniest Home Videos turned up to 11.
That could not have said it better.
It's funny to watch somebody get kicked in the nuts, but at a certain point, there's a threshold. Yeah. And Mythbusters goes way above that threshold, and it's still okay to laugh at it, which is awesome. Before we get to that really satisfying drop, though, this is where the small-scale testing we were talking about in the open comes in. And they specifically, for the first time on the show, mention and call out and focus on my favorite thing, which is the storage boxes in M5. We've talked about this throughout the show. It's just an iconic visual that I love from the show. And Adam has to go up on the wall of boxes to get a doll to use in a small scale test. And we got our best shot yet of the labels on some of the boxes. Can I read them to you?
Please.
So all of the boxes were labeled toys. We were in the toy section of the shop. But some of the ones that I saw, dolls and robots, which is an interesting combination.
Yeah, why are they together?
I would keep my robots on their own and probably on a lower shelf.
Yes. That you're begging for a Chucky situation. Like, come on.
Yes. If one of those dolls comes to life, we are all in big trouble.
Yes.
Dinos, not dinosaurs, specifically
Just
dinos.
dinos. Excellent.
One of the bins was just labeled toddler, which is alarming.
I mean, we feed him. Like, there's nothing to worry about.
We check on him once or twice a
There's
day.
holes. There's holes on the top of the box. He's got leaves in there. He's fine.
There was another one labeled trains.
Okay.
And the last one, which Adam goes to, is just labeled action figures, which those two, not the weirdest of the sort, but I love imagining all of the things that are in those strange boxes. I kind of want to do, for folks who are just listening on audio, we are now doing video episodes of the podcast. Right now, we're just putting up clips, but we'll have some full video episodes coming out in the near future. But you can see Harrison and I both have walls of nerddom behind us. And I have thought about, for the podcast, getting something that transforms this into the boxes from M5.
Oh, yes.
Wouldn't that be great?
That would be great.
Because I am obsessed with this.
You can have a nice like visual cue where you change what's written on them like every episode.
Ooh, that's cool. Yeah, all right. Well, you just gave me more work. We'll see.
That's my job, Cliff. Making everything harder for you.
Here's a thing that really got me in this episode and sent me down a mini rabbit hole. Not a full research hole, but a mini rabbit hole.
Okay.
They end up choosing a toy prototype to be Mini Buster that they say Jamie built. Did you recognize what these toy prototypes were? They're dolls of the singers from NSYNC. And I remember explicitly seeing these dolls in like Toys R Us around this time.
Oh, wow.
And apparently they were prototyped by Jamie Heineman, which Jamie Heineman working on NSYNC dolls, we couldn't even come up with that in a riff here on the podcast. There is no reality in which I would ever put that combination of words together, but apparently it really happened.
It's quite the Mad Lib, you know?
Yes.
Like Jamie Heineman making dolls of NSYNC prototype.
Exactly. And I
He
did
nailed
the
them.
research. Do you know your NSYNC performers?
Golly, not as well as I should.
The first that they picked was Joey Fatone.
Okay.
Is the first person they pull out, but they end up using a doll of J.C. Chase. And I looked this up, and that doll now goes for between $10 and $20 on eBay.
Oh, they're just throwing money away.
There was part of me that hoped I'd look it up and it would be like a really rare, like, they're now
Expensive.
worth thousands of dollars,
Yeah.
and we just see them in this episode just chucking it on the ground over and over again.
Well, perhaps the prototype is worth more. You don't know.
Especially now the prototype has been on Mythbusters and has been thrown around the shop for a day or two.
That's right.
Maybe that makes it worth more. But yeah, if you want your own JC Chase doll as seen on Mythbusters, you can go get it on eBay. It's not that expensive. I seriously considered buying one and putting it behind me.
Should.
But it's such an inside joke. Yeah, it's a write-off. It's such an inside joke that I'm going to be on like a video call for work and people are just going to be like, is he a big NSYNC guy?
If they're able to like peg that just off of seeing it, they're the big NSYNC fan here, not the other way around.
It's a them problem, not a me problem at that point.
Exactly.
All right, that's fair enough. The mini test here using what they call Mini Buster, also known as JC Chase from NSYNC. Then they use a mini plywood sheet, which was quite satisfying. This was kind of like doll furniture. Like there's something satisfying about seeing it to test the drop speed. And they specifically here, we've seen this on the show before, but I feel like this is the first time they explain using a scale rule and a high-speed camera to actually calculate the speed something is falling. We saw that last season back with Chicken Gun, but this is the first time they really explain.
Chicken Gun.
Oh, Harrison's favorite. This is the first time they really
peace.
explain what's going on, which was nice to see. Yeah. And in this early test, plywood actually slows the fall by about 25% in the small-scale test, which I will say is a lot more than I expected.
A ton more. I mean, like, I get why you would think that it might, but again, I mean, we've talked about this a lot, where it's like a lot of these just sound like high ideas, where like,
Yeah,
it's the
yeah.
very first thing that comes to mind. If you think about it for more than 5 seconds, you're like, no, that's not going to work.
There's no way.
No, so I was kind of surprised by some of the outcomes here.
Yeah, I was too. It actually gave me, because I think we had the same reaction early on of like, yeah, no, this ain't gonna work. But seeing this was made me feel like, but this might be a little bit different than we think. Much like last week with the levitation machine, though, they abandon the confines of this really fast and decide to have a build-off. Right after levitation machine, we get our second big Adam and Jamie build-off that we're going to see them pit their own plywood flying rigs. That's fun to say. Plywood flying rigs against one another. With two different designs. What did you think of the designs here?
I just love that Adam referred to his as a nun's habit, like a flying nun. Yeah, that was great. I've never thought about that, but it's It would especially be funny if it were attached to the head, and then like they come out.
So wait.
Transform.
Have you not seen the film The Flying Nun?
Are you messing with me?
No.
This is a real.
It's a real thing.
I don't believe you. To Google.
Harrison's Googling. Google The Flying Nun.
No.
This is about to blow your mind.
Well, I'll be damned. Wait. It's a sitcom.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
There's 3 seasons, and it has one of the best title cards I've ever seen in my entire life.
Right?
That's amazing.
and it's pretty much exactly what you're describing, right? Of the habit on the head flying.
Wow. Okay, so then it's a great idea. I mean, 3 seasons. That's a robust 82 episodes.
Well, I know we haven't even done
I know what we're
episodes.
doing a rewatch of next. That's amazing.
Join us next week for episode 1 of The Flying Nun Show.
With music by the Monkees.
Really?
That's so fun.
Wow. God. That's awesome.
It's not bad. I have no idea what it is, and it will probably not be as satisfying as watching Buster plummet to his death multiple times, but...
Well, the audience does expect you to come back next week with a full report on the Flying Nun.
I thought you were going to say with a full flying nun habit. Just supposed to
no,
sew
that's
it
for the
over
video version of the show right there. That's how we do it. Yeah, they end up making 2 different designs going back to the Adam and Jamie, how their brains work kind of dynamic that we've seen before. One's the parachute style, which is the Flying Nun. It's kind of multiple sheets of plywood put together to form this kind of ish parachute bowl looking thing. And then the other, Jamie's plan is more of a wing style where he's kind of trying to make almost like a propeller to try to slow the descent. And they test the small scale rigs once again, and surprisingly, these designs seem to actually do something and to potentially be making a difference. I early on was really honestly probably betting on Adam's over Jamie's because Adam makes the point of like, yes, a propeller can make a helicopter, it can lift a helicopter off the ground, but also that much spin can cause like a death spiral.
Yep.
So I'm not sure how that's going to work. But Adam's parachute, kind of seemed to follow pretty basic logic. And I don't know, that's where I would have put my money.
Well, it also worked really well in the small scale. Like that seems to be the one that, none of them really worked, but that seems to be the one that like, if I've got to place money on it, that's the closest,
Totally. Yeah, that seemed to be the one that you'd want to put money in. So yeah, after the small scale, they pretty much go right to the full scale rigs and having to build these things, which, based on what we've seen on the show, what we've seen them do and put together, this didn't seem like the craziest rig, just making stuff out of wood, but it's maybe one of the most difficult builds they've ever had, which was kind of surprising to me.
Apparently, I really didn't know that plywood would just snap like it did,
Yeah. Well, they were also using single plies of plywood because this was another one of those real like test taking kind of like like messing with the parameters sort of equations where they said that the myth called for a single 5-ply sheet.
Right.
So we're going to use 5 single ply sheets.
I mean, okay, I guess.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. That's like one of the, like, that's technically correct.
Yeah.
But maybe not in the spirit of what we're talking about.
They also, like, the little animation, they showed it like a few times where it's kind of like a more classic, like, glider setup, you know?
Yeah.
They didn't build that. They didn't even try anything like that. I was really surprised by that.
I'm glad you mentioned the animation because I thought this was some of the best animation we'd seen yet on the show.
Big time.
The little Buster, like you said, holding on almost like a glider, flying around, flying through walls, leaving impressions and that kind of thing. That was really, really good stuff. Like that was a notch up. That was.
There's a reason they used
the
it multiple times.
Yeah. Yeah, it was probably expensive too. It was probably really expensive to
get your
do
money's worth, right?
that kind of animation. Yeah, but it looked great and definitely added something to the show. I got to thinking about, you know, we talked about last week the Adam and Jamie competition stuff and why it works well in the show. What I thought about here that's really smart from a TV perspective is that the Adam versus Jamie dynamic almost adds a second narrative to the show. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, okay, there's the myth and we're testing that and that's fun, but there's also now a reality competition show in the middle of it.
Yes.
Which is really, really smart and just a great way to add a whole other dynamic to the show without, it doesn't change the show. It doesn't change what the show is about, but it deepens it and makes it even better. And that's very smart from a production standpoint.
Totally agree. I also thought it was super fun how there were several things that they tested besides the gliders that they just decided to, like, out of nowhere. That was really funny.
Yeah, I was really glad to see that when they actually go out to do the testing, I was worried for a second that we weren't actually going to get a single sheet of plywood because they abandoned that idea so quickly that I was like, oh, that would kind of, in the spirit of the myth, that would kind of suck. And we've seen that before where they just go, nope, can't work. We're going to make it big. But they did. They came back and they did the single sheet of plywood. And they also did, let me see, I have it in my notes. They do a rain umbrella, just like your standard umbrella. Just Mary Poppins right to the ground. Just not good.
So have you seen Arrested Development, right?
Yeah.
That made me immediately think of when Tobias is Mrs. Featherbottom and he starts a song and then steps off the side with the umbrella and just plummets.
Just yes.
So good.
They do a picnic umbrella as well, which for a half second, I thought the picnic umbrella had worked.
Yeah.
Didn't it look so much more elegant, that slow kind of drop? And I was like, oh, did that actually work? No.
I almost think that if it hadn't have hit, because like it did hit the side of the wall and that kind of tipped it. So I almost feel like if it hadn't, I don't know, maybe.
What was even worse was with the parachute when Buster's head hit his own knee.
That was really bad. That also
was brutal.
Immediately made me think of like in the Dark Knight series, how his cape can like turn into a glider briefly, and he does that a lot where like he just jumps off the side and then like catches it at the last second. It's like, I don't know, buddy. Like some kneecaps are busting there.
I want to see a scene where Batman hits himself in the face with his own knee and he's sitting there, oh,
I gotta get Joker. Batman, you're bleeding out of your eye. No, I gotta get Joker. I gotta get him.
Speaking of blood, we have to talk about the ball of death.
Oh, wow.
So I will admit that when they introduced this idea, I was like, this is some bull.
Yeah.
There's no way that this is really a thing. But it turns out to actually work really well. And I was very surprised. But they talk about how up to this point in the show, we've seen a couple of different methods for measuring impact on Buster's body. They connected him to stuff that's used to actually in vehicle crashes, like actually with crash test dummies, accelerometers and that kind of thing in the past. But they want to make their own G-force meter. And the way that they do that is by cutting the bulb off of a light bulb and filling it with fake blood. And when they got to that point, I was like, this is a joke, right? like that, what, how is that going to do anything? But they then put it in a metal ball that goes in Buster's head. And apparently from their testing, I don't know how they came to this idea or how the science worked out. They did not explain that, but the bulb should be protected so that it only breaks at the point that it would be essentially a traumatic brain injury. And it gives them a repeatable and visual way, because they fill it with fake blood, to see whether or not Buster would live. It turned out to be really cool, but at first I was super unsure with where they were going with that.
Yeah, just like, you just did this to make Christine uncomfortable, didn't you?
Boy, did it.
It did. It made me uncomfortable because, like, this isn't like 70s fake blood, right? Like, it's not just like a kind of a milky red, like this looks super real.
It's bloody. Yeah. Which is, there was a couple of moments where I was like, I'm kind of surprised they got away with this, because it is like we were saying, dropping something very violently, and then it's a human looking figure with blood coming out of its head.
Yeah. Poor Buster.
So the thing that we glossed over is, before they even got to testing the umbrellas and all that stuff, they just took Buster up and did a control.
Yep.
Which is a very sciencey term for just dropping him to the ground.
We're just going to send him straight down.
And this is what we were saying earlier, that is just so incredibly violent to watch him hit. I think Christine says she was like laying on the ground when it happened. I don't know if she was getting a shot or something, and she felt the ground vibrate. He hit so hard.
That's so, and again, we can have this. We can laugh at this. Like,
we can laugh this all day. He's not real. And he's our Lord and Savior. He'll be back.
He will always be back. Count on it.
Always be there for us.
Yeah. The infinite coming of Buster.
That's a book title.
I've worded things better. You know? I've worded things worse, but I've definitely worded things better.
I mean, if he's immortal, both can be true. They said that he hits the ground going 34 to 35 miles per hour.
Pretty fast.
Which, think about that. Like, have you ever been, I know when you're in a car, 35 miles per hour, it's like, oh God, why am I going so slow?
Yeah.
But if you're ever standing on like the side of the road and a car goes by at 35 miles per hour, that is insanely fast.
Yeah. Or like, I'm always surprised when it shows you the speed of roller coasters and you're like, well, that's not that fast. Like, it's only going like 40, but to feel it without everything involved in the car that kind of like cancels out the inertia.
Yeah.
That's fast. That's
it's
real
incredibly fast. And I did love after it just wrecks Buster. I mean, he just hits the ground. There's blood everywhere.
It's seeping out of his head.
And they're all laughing about how funny this is. And Jamie just says,
Buster kind of looked like a baby bird that just fell out of the nest.
What baby birds are you watching, Jamie? What violent like Our Planet special has Jamie been watching where birds hit the ground at 35 miles per hour?
The Heinemann Farm, apparently. My God. He just seemed completely unfazed, like, yeah, that's what happens. Bird leaves the nest, it plummets to the ground. Its mother chucks him directly at the ground.
When they finally get to the single plywood sheet, my note was, I can't stop laughing at this.
Yes.
Because the plywood somehow actually increases the speed of descent. He hits the ground harder than ever, and then the plywood breaks over his lifeless body.
Head. Like, it's like he brings it down on himself.
Yeah, just like a final injustice, just bam!
Oh, fantastic.
It was so funny.
Really
I mean,
good visual.
Of course it was never going to work, and it really does not.
I really didn't expect it to work that poorly, though. I didn't expect it to, like, do more harm.
Yeah, I didn't expect it to make it worse.
Than just stepping off directly.
Yeah, he would have been better just jumping off into the distance.
Yeah.
Oh God, it's so brutal. They finally get to their special plywood rigs, and Adams is up first. It's his parachute. And in this moment, And this episode is just back to back with hilarious quotable moments.
Yep.
We get one of the best Robert Lee lines and deliveries, followed immediately by one of the best Adam Savage lines and deliveries. I had to pull this clip.
These rigs represent 3 days of skill, passion, and effort. Pity, really.
What a fat lot of good that did.
The length of the pause between whoom and the camera just slowly pans over to Adam.
That's my favorite, is that Adam just like it pans over to him and he's still looking at it for a bit and then he turns and gives that line. It's just...
I think this is one, I get the vibe Adam really believed it was going to work and he was going to win this one. Yeah. I think in his head, he had an image of Buster safely floating to the ground and he was going to be, finally, I'm vindicated. I've won one of these competitions.
Yeah.
And nope.
And not only does it not work, it's so loud you can hear it in the audio as it gush.
Gush. Oh my God. Great moment. Just props to, I don't know who wrote this episode. I don't know if this is an Anthony Griffiths episode or maybe an Andrew Farrell episode, but the pity really is a brilliant, brilliant moment. Great combination between what they captured in the field, the writing, the VO, just a fantastic moment.
It all comes together.
And it's no better with Jamie's wing. It's total destruction. He just... The wing, he tries to spin it to give him something to go down, and he just goes horizontal and smacks into the ground.
Jamie's is even fun. Jamie's might be the funniest because he very briefly glides kind of like over and then zigzags back, and then it turns, and it's like it just plummets straight down. Like all of the air underneath it disappears at the same time, and it's just like
and it is where you remember that in the original myth,
he nosedives directly into the ground.
What they were testing for was not only survivability, but that you could steer yourself back into the building. Keep that in mind with this. It's not just about living. It's about flying like James Bond with a parachute, you know?
Done.
Oh, God, it's so good. They cut to, at one point here, they cut to some kids who have been nearby watching the experiments, which first I was just like, these kids are just watching a bloody crash test dummy get lifted and dropped over and over again. But they cut to it at one point, and it's like, oh, we've had some fans show up. And then they go away for a second. I was like, what is that about? It makes sense because at the end of this here, after Jamie's rig has failed, they cut to the kids saying this myth is busted in the background. And I thought, oh, good thing they showed the kids the first time and set that up. Because if they had just cut to a bunch of kids at this point, it would have been the weirdest thing ever.
You see, I would have been in favor of that. Well, you know how we do this on the show. We get the children's choir to deliver the verdict. That's how it goes.
Oh, God.
And then I love how Adam is like, well, that went better than I ever could have possibly imagined. Just like a little faith, Mr. Savage. Damn.
I did think it was really cool. This was something they had not previously set up in the episode, and we haven't really seen this before of, we've done the thing, we know it's not going to work, but hey, let's do a separate test for a different part of it and kind of create another visual that you want to see. In setting up a zip line and actually having Adam and Jamie do this, holding onto a sheet of plywood and flying to see about the actual human element. Could you even hold on?
Yeah.
Could you potentially, is there any chance you could steer? And it doesn't work, but I thought that was really cool. I thought that was a nice addition to the episode. But like I said, they didn't really set it up. It just kind of happened at the end, but I liked that.
I also just adore, of course, you already know where I'm going with this. When Adam zooms in and like kind of goes over Jamie, he lifts his legs and goes, I fought on you. Like as he's just zooming by.
He can't resist.
No.
Even in a moment like that,
and you know
he can't resist.
He's right. He's right.
It's also... I liked that Adam was wearing the, a very official safety gear, which was a football helmet and hockey pads.
Yeah, famous for working, both of those things, right? It's not like
Yes.
they've had to re-engineer them every 5 to 10 years to try to cut down on serious injuries.
And also famously designed to stop, protect you in falls.
Yes. Yes, they're so good for that. They're so good at protecting you after jumping off a 4-story building.
All those 60-foot football falls is what they were designed to stop. We all know this.
I keep telling them that they should stop building football fields on the side of skyscrapers. It's just not a good idea, but
It's the
They won't
football
listen.
field from Wayside School.
yeah.
That's a deep cut 90s reference
There
for
you go.
anybody out there listening.
I don't
In
get
the
it,
end-
but I just like laughing.
Harrison's such a good sport to be like, oh, I'm just gonna laugh at that. Even though
I don't know
am-
what's happening.
There's about 3 people in our audience who just heard that joke and we're like, whoa,
They're sold for life.
they're sold for life. They are fans for the rest of the show. They end up saying on this that even taking out the physics of it, you can't even hold on to or steer the plywood. So every facet of this myth just doesn't work.
It's busted.
Or, as the kids would say, this myth is busted.
Adam's pentagonal plywood parachute is taking shape. He's just got to remember those sheets are really fragile. Now they're down to 10 sheets, and there's no room for error.
Myth 2, beat the radar detector. So
You
here
are
it
a
is, the
radar detector.
very first build team solo myth, which was really exciting to see. So this is all based around various methods to legally, and they use that term specifically, beat a police radar detector. Similar to our beat the breathalyzer myth from last season. Very kind of similar setup here. Had you heard any of these things before?
Nope. Because there is a device that, which I mean, they bring it up and they say like,
Yeah.
we're not going to use that because that's illegal. And it's like, I have to imagine any of these are illegal. Like any
Well, yeah, they do
method
get there.
that you're specifically trying to use to like tamper with is probably not allowed.
yeah, I took legal as really being more like DIY.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That seemed like that's what they were really testing for, was what are household ways that you could, maybe beat the radar detector and get away with it.
Well, I also did not know that CHIPS stood for California Highway Patrol.
Oh, really?
Yeah, no idea. I mean,
You thought-
I'm aware that CHIPS is a thing, but like I've never watched it.
You just thought that like those guys loved sandwiches and potatoes?
I thought that they were really into Chippendales. Like, who knows? They don't have a monopoly on the word chips.
And they're even missing an eye. So what are they
They're
up to
even missing.
anyway?
They're cheating. They're totally cheating. So similar though to the breathalyzer one. Do you think
Yeah.
that there is one that they arrived at that could have worked and they weren't allowed to show it? Or
That is interesting. From what I understand and have heard said over the years, maybe that's something when we do our recap this season with Adam Savage, we can ask him about. Would be a good note. But from what I understand of them saying in the past is they never had a myth where they shot something they were not able to air for those reasons.
great.
So now I know they have said there are myths they just decided not to do.
Sure.
Because the results might be something they couldn't put on TV, so they weren't going to put the time into it.
Yeah.
But it seems like
Killed
no.
Buster on live television.
They did that many times,
Yeah.
over and over again. No, I think it was like RFID in credit cards, is they didn't want to put out there basically how fungible that technology is.
Interesting.
Was one that I could be wrong about that, but I think that's something that I've heard Adam talk about before. That was something that they just decided not to tackle because they didn't want to get into it. So
That's fair.
who knows? I know people will always doubt that though. I think that's one of those things that people will go, but I heard about this way and you guys didn't test it. I'm sure that was something they got from this myth.
And that's what the email is for.
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
what the email is for.
And maybe we'll see this again with another Myths Revisited episode down the road. Who knows? But I think overall, like, biggest takeaway with this whole myth is I just found myself appreciating how far the build team have come on camera in like 5 episodes.
Yep.
Right? I mean, I know Carrie was technically in the pilots, but barely.
Yeah.
And then we just saw them in the Myths Revisited, the season premiere. We just met these people for the first time. And they were, it's not that they were bad on camera, but they were like normal people would be on camera, as if you're not used to it. It's a weird thing. They have all, in just a couple of episodes, come so far. They have their personalities. We know what each of them does. We know how they kind of are operating as like a super group here of people of different disciplines. Like, I was really amazed by their poise and presence on camera throughout this. Maybe that's why they just decided to give them a myth. Maybe it just made sense,
Yeah. And I mean, like, I really didn't, like, there's not a whole lot of supervision over this one.
No, it doesn't
like,
appear to be.
They probably have to. It was probably scripted, but they pitch it to the guys who give them their blessing. And then they go out and test. And I mean, again, similar to the last one, there's almost like a bunch of mini myths smushed into this one, because they're not going to sit there and cover Earl, the Cadillac, and all of this nonsense if there's just no chance of efficacy. So they try it in miniature first. More great miniature action.
Yeah, the small scale here was fun too. Actually, the visual that we get of the little car shells was super cool. I thought like that was another one of those props I would love to have, as one of those shells. The plan is basically they use an RC car and they vacuum mold it so that they can make different shells that fit over it that they can put their various testing methodologies on, or the various things that are supposed to beat the radar. They also, we should say, they lay out 2 different types of police speed guns, basically, one being radar and one being LiDAR, which are similar but work in different ways. So they're going to test both in the event that there is something inherent to one of these methods that can jam both. I was aware of the fact that there were 2 only because I have family that work in law enforcement, and so I have heard the stories. To me, that was not a big surprise. Was that something you were familiar with?
No, this was news to me.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, I still only kind of know how radar works. I feel like I do a bit better now, but I mean, the fact that they use separate ones. Do you know which one came first? LiDAR sounds like it would be newer.
My guess was that radar would come first, but I don't know. I didn't do a research hole on that one, but throughout this, it doesn't really seem like any difference pops up between the 2. But I thought it was good that they were laying that out early on and kind of being exhaustive.
Yeah.
In the small scale test, we get a handful of things. I'm going to run through them. If there's something that sticks out to you, let me know. But it was all kind of fast. It was really fun, but it was all pretty fast. The first is just blue paint.
Yeah.
Just painting the car completely blue. Doesn't seem to work. It doesn't work at all. Prism tape, which is like tape they put on fishing lures. Doesn't work at all. I think part of the idea with a lot of these is that it's going to be reflective in some way. But as we find out, being more reflective actually makes it easier for the radar gun to detect you.
Fantastic.
So they get that with aluminum foil. They actually pick up the RC car sooner than if they didn't have anything on it. They talk about an LED at one point, which was funny because I feel like this is sort of that, like, LEDs weren't super common in daily life yet. And so maybe this was supposed to be like, they even explain an LED is a light emitting diode.
Yeah.
It's like, it's funny that we're in the era where you have to explain what an LED is. And then the last thing that they did was iron paint.
That was wild.
What was that?
I don't know. Who has the ability to paint their entire car with iron? That's insane.
And why? I mean, maybe they said, and I didn't write it down, but what that's actually used for? They said it was incredibly heavy and expensive, and it when they put it on the car, the RC car won't even go.
Which was hilarious.
It's just, which is pretty funny.
Yeah.
Because it's just so heavy and completely impractical that obviously it's not going to work. But I had never seen that before.
No, me neither.
Iron paint.
Frankly, I hadn't heard of any of these.
Yeah. No, I wasn't aware of any radar methods. I mean, I've heard of the various like you said, jammers and scanners and that kind of thing that can help you, but not these homebrew kind of ways to do it.
No, the only thing that I knew throughout this entire myth was that you're not. I did know about the like obstructing the driver's view with things hanging from your rearview mirror. The only reason I do know that is that it's often used as a pretext to pull people over when they probably don't need to be.
Well, they even seem surprised when the highway patrol officer brings that up. They're like, well, this would be fine, right? We could just put. I mean, they go overboard and put a disco ball in the window, but still,
and not
like,
a small one either. I mean,
No.
It's a big disco ball,
full blown disco ball.
Hell yeah.
And they tell him no, that would be totally illegal. It's like, oh, really?
Whoops.
Whoops. Good to know. Because I know a lot of people used to have CDs from their rearview mirror. I mean, I've seen that for sure in cars back in the day. So that was a little bit surprising. But when they go to full scale, they're going to try their various methods, some of which we've seen, some of which we haven't, with the California Highway Patrol actually overseeing the experiments here. And I love that when they are setting all of this up and they're getting everything built, Jamie is just watching them like a shop dad.
Yeah. Yeah.
It is that, like you said, like, oh, the kids are making spaghetti tonight kind of vibe to this episode.
It just comes in as like where you're gonna have to boil the water before you put the noodles in there.
He does come in at one point when they're trying to make the rotating mirror array, and he's just like, oh, no, what you're doing is not going to work. Let me explain it to you. And what he describes, to my ears, is the most complicated thing imaginable.
I tuned out. Like, my eyes glazed over. I was just
Tori's did too, if you noticed.
Yes,
The look on his face was like, oh, crap. This just got so much harder than it needs to be.
Yeah.
I was hoping this was going to be an easy day at work, and it just got a lot harder.
The end result looks hilarious.
It does. It's like a weather vane from hell.
It's awesome. It looks like something that would like start spinning before like a Death Star laser comes out of it. You know, like
yes, absolutely. Bond has to shut that down.
Bond absolutely has to shut that down.
I got in the Bond reference this week.
Well done,
helping you out.
Well
there
done.
You go.
Yeah, thank you. I almost forgot.
So a bunch of methods get tested here, so we can run through them. The first is CDs, disco balls, and keys hanging from the rear view, as we talked about. They pick the car up right away. It does not work at all. Next was tinfoil on the hubcaps, which was, I guess the theory there is maybe you're pointing the radar gun at the wheels, which you're not.
No,
that's not how that works.
No,
and that's busted straight away. They covered the entire car in tinfoil, which was awesome to look at.
Yes, it was.
I did love that visual, but this is where they pick it up way sooner.
Yeah,
because you're reflecting the radar or LiDAR right back at an even greater distance. LEDs all around the license plate. They put like 100 LEDs around the license plate. That's busted straight away. My personal favorite, other than maybe the mirror wheel of death, my personal favorite is the chaff gun.
The chaff gun was really cool. Because that was one that I thought maybe this will work.
Yeah, it seemed to have, I mean, at least, and they explain how chaff guns are a real thing and are meant to break up like enemy targeting systems in planes and that kind of thing. But I guess it's just a completely different technology.
Yeah.
So it couldn't possibly work. I did love that Carrie... The way that they make the chaff gun is cool, of actually putting aluminum foil in a modified industrial fire extinguisher. But then Carrie forgets to pull the pin on the fire extinguisher, so it doesn't go. And you just see the car go past and nothing happens. And Tori looks in the camera and goes, bet you forgot to take the pen out.
And that was cut together so well, where she's like, why is it not working? And I bet she forgot to take it, like as she's very clearly forgetting.
And so when she stops and pulls the pin out, it immediately fires.
That was also great. That was also great. Like a delayed reaction like that is always good comedy.
Yes. Yeah. Great visual comedy. But the chaff gun, unsurprisingly, does not do anything. And it is busted. Then we get the mirror wheel of death, which, like you said, it kind of looked like maybe it would do something. Like, it looks complicated enough. And the idea of it was that the wheel would be spinning at a much slower rate. And so the radar gun would pick up the spinning mirrors, which are moving slower. The problem is they're on top of a car that is moving at a particular speed. So there's just no way that's going to work.
No.
It's like jumping in the elevator. It's not going to work. You're moving at the same speed.
Yeah. It's just not.
You're
it's not
attached to
happening.
it.
It's not happening.
The last one, last method they tried was matte black paint, painting the car completely black.
I really hoped
to
this
try to
one
make
would
it
work.
Yeah, it does have kind of the allure, right?
Yeah.
It kind of go, oh, well, it's not going to be reflective, so it's not going to work.
That's how the Batmobile gets away.
Exactly.
So much sense.
That's why Batman never gets speeding tickets.
That's right. That's the only reason.
It's the only reason. But that doesn't work either. So every single method they tested here was busted, which was a little bit disappointing. You were looking for something a little bit, it would have been cool to see something that, at least seemed to work or had some sort of real effect, but nothing really did. But I still really liked this myth, and all the kind of mini myths contained within it were fun. And it was super fun to actually see the build team in sort of their full glory on the show for the first time.
I mean, it was quite an impressive first outing.
Yeah. Yeah, you can see why that became a fixture of the show. You can see why that stuck around on the show for, almost the rest of the run.
Yeah.
And
it's a good start. It's a good pilot program.
Very good start. Very exciting to see. And we're excited to come back and see more next week. We hope you guys will join us. Our myths will be quicksand, or our episode, rather. I'm not sure if there's other myths in that episode. We'll find out next week. I remember, now you talked about previously on the last episode how you had nightmares about elevators.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like quicksand is something, when I was a kid, cartoons and media made me believe that quicksand was going to be a much bigger threat in my life than it turned out to be. I feel like it was all over everything we watched as a kid. So I remember this episode being really scary to me.
I was prepped. I was ready for a quicksand attack. I haven't had to use my training yet, but we'll see. We'll find out.
We'll find out. We hope you guys will watch that episode and then come back and listen to us break it down. But until then, see you next time.
Bye-bye, bubbies.
Try This at Home is produced by Slugline Media. The show is written, hosted, edited, and shot onto the internet by Cliff Bumgardner and Harrison Stewart. Our music is by the mysterious Breakmaster Cylinder. You can follow the show on Instagram at TryThisPod or email us trythisathomepod@gmail.com.
Wayside School was where, instead of building a school horizontally, the builders messed up. It was a kid's book, and they built the school vertically. And so it was like a school that was built like one story but turned this way. So it was like one continuous, and they did a series of kids books about it. So it was like a very tall
kids,
skyscraper.
They're kids, but I thought that you were telling me
that this is a
some
real thing?
engineer fucked up so bad. And that all the builders were just like, look, man, I'm just picking up a paycheck. I don't give a how you're doing this.